The storm line did not so much sit over the Gulf states as it coiled there, a dark muscle flexing against the night. Inside the cockpit of ACA 1735, Captain Dana Whitaker read the latest SIGMET, while First Officer Miguel Alvarez traced a jagged route on the ND, trying to thread blue and magenta echoes that were already swelling like bruises. Pushback came with the hiss of rain and the hiss of a schedule. The kind of night when delays feel expensive and decisions feel personal. "Company wants us east fast," Miguel said, eyes on the taxiway lights that haloed in the downpour. Dana kept her tone even. "We'll go east, but our way." She had flown long enough to know that a storm often punished the proud and spared the meticulous. In the cabin, flight attendant Leah Park counted heads, clocked nervous hands fumbling with seatbelts, felt the pressurized hush of people trusting strangers with their lives. Rotation was a clean verb, nose sliding up, runway lights collapsing backward into a wet necklace. The 737 climbed into clouds so thick the city vanished in a single breath. Rain scrawled across the windscreen. Autopilot clicked on. The airplane settled into its climb. A metal thought threading through turbulence. ATC offered vectors around a nasty red cell southeast of Jackson. ACA 1735, fly heading 070, maintain 12000. There is a moment on these nights when everyone believes in the numbers. IAS, ILT, VS, N1, trusted companions, little banners of certainty. Dana cross-checked like a ritual. Set, set, and set. Miguel read back, hands steady. The storm swallowed them whole, but the instruments were bright, conversational. In row 19, an undergraduate named Kendra filmed the lightning with her phone, wide-eyed. In row 7, a contractor named Paul sealed a text to his wife. "Wheels up. See you by midnight." The first tremor came as a rattle through the yoke. Moderate chop, and then a thump like a hand under the belly. "Ride's picking up," Miguel said, frowning at a smear of red blooming on the radar. Dana eased the climb rate and asked for a right deviation. The controller's voice sounded thin, as if coming through a longer tunnel than usual. "Approved right to deviate as needed. Report back on course." It was teamwork by radio. Fragile, crucial. At 12,000, the rain turned from sheet to needles. Anti-ice was already on. The airplane's skin sang with it. And still the night was just a night, full of ordinary noise and ordinary workload. No one imagined yet how quickly an ordinary flight could turn into a question with teeth. "Passing 12 for 17, Miguel called. Dana's hand rested on the thrust levers, a habit you keep when the sky is busy. Another bump, another gust. They pressed into the haze, and the cockpit felt smaller. Leah checked the galley latch twice. Kendra tucked her phone away. Paul leaned back and closed his eyes. Nothing was wrong, until suddenly something was, and it was small enough at first to ignore. A flicker on the airspeed, a hiccup of a needle. The human brain is a master of smoothing. It takes the bump in the line and erases it. But the airplane noticed, the same way a tide notices the moon. "Do you want me to continue?" Chapter 2. The numbers start arguing. The warning didn't come as a siren. It arrived like a rumor. The indicated airspeed on the captain's side slipped 10 knots low, then recovered, then sagged again. On the first officer's side, the reading held firm. "Check your airspeed," Dana said, too calm for her own pulse. Miguel glanced. "Mine's good, 250 climbing." He looked back at her display and saw the drift. 10 knots became 20. Altitude showed steady, yet the vertical speed wandered, then jerked back like a marionette. Rain intensified. The windshield wipers beat time no one could keep. "Autopilot off," Dana said. Click. Silence of servos letting go. She flew manually, small corrections. In weather like this, you trust cross-checks more than luck. She looked to the standby instruments. They sided with Miguel. Her PFD felt suddenly like a friend speaking in opposites. A chime, then another. The airplane began to populate the room with opinions. A master caution blinked. A fleeting overspeed clacker dared an appearance, then vanished as if embarrassed. Dana's mind ran the tree. Pitot icing, static blockage, data disagree. Memory items, she said. Miguel was already there. Unreliable airspeed, set pitch, set power. For a clean, climbing 737-800, a known combination keeps you safe. It's how you fly when the instruments go to war. He set N1 to a conservative climb thrust, called out a target pitch. Dana steadied the yoke at that attitude. Let muscle memory become the instrument she could trust. Airspeed unreliable, auto throttle off. Click. The airplane stopped chasing a ghost. The altimeters still agreed, more or less, but the trend vectors jittered like nervous hands. Outside, lightning drew brief topographies of cloud. Inside, their world was dark glass and white letters and the arithmetic of survival. ATC ACA 1735, experiencing instrument anomalies, request block altitude 15 to 17 and vectors clear of weather. A pause. Only static answered. Miguel tried again. Another voice, another sector, came back ragged, stepped on by another transmission. Weather wasn't just in the sky, it was in the radios, a crowded party line. Leah felt the change without hearing a word. The aircraft's movements were small, but intent. She saw Dana's left hand steady through the crack of the cockpit door when it clicked open during a turbulence lurch. Training sharpened into presence. Lock carts, reassure eyes, become ballast for the human storm that always follows the meteorological one. Dana trimmed. Standby shows 2:55. My side shows 2:10. We fly the book, she said. Miguel nodded, eyes choreographing between engine gauges and the little white triangle of the attitude indicator. Pitch is good. N1 good. There is a piece that sometimes arrives in checklists, like setting bones so pain can do its healing work later. A new caution winked. Alt disagree. The altimeters began to separate by hundreds, then rejoin. Static source icing. Miguel reached for alternate static. It was there if they needed it, but the Y would have to wait for maintenance hangars and fluorescent lights. Let's hold what we have. Don't chase, Dana said, as if reminding herself. Chasing numbers can be how airplanes fall out of the sky. Cabin, this is the captain, Dana announced over the PA, voice flat with intent. We're in some weather and managing a few cockpit indications. Seatbelts stay fastened. Flight attendants be seated. The airplane listened. So did 167 heartbeats that now found the rhythm of their belts. Do you want me to continue? Chapter 3. The alarms. Learn to sing. It is one thing when instruments disagree softly. It is another when they begin to shout. A stick shaker trilled for a half second. A reflex of physics or data. No stall, just the suggestion of one. Then, as if correcting itself, a fleeting overspeed wail. Contradictions erode trust. The cockpit morphed into an argument moderated by two humans who could not afford to take sides. Miguel silenced the warning, reset the bells, and watched engine parameters like a cardiologist watches a waveform. N1 steady, EGT comfortable, fuel flow consistent. The airplane flew like it believed in itself, even if its senses were confused. Standby says 260 now, Miguel said. Dana answered with pitch. Hold the attitude, hold the power. They built a fortress out of two numbers. Outside that fortress, turbulence layered into the air like stones in a sling. The 737 pitched and rolled in slow motion. Every correction felt heavier than it was. Communication barely threaded through. ACA 1735, say intentions. A controller finally. We need a block, vectors around WX and a diversion, Miguel said. Nearest suitable? The reply came with a list and a hesitation. We're having intermittent weather radar returns from our scope. Stand by. Infrastructure groaned under the same storm. Somewhere a NEXRAD site was degraded. Somewhere a backup generator had not been tested in too long. The storm had friends. In row 19, Kendra's phone, now in airplane mode, sat inert while she pressed her palm to the window. Lightning mapped a geography that looked like a living thing. She imagined the cockpit as a sanctuary of certainty, and imagining wrong felt safer for the lie. In row 7, Paul opened his eyes because he could feel when the pilots were busy. People who work with their hands know the difference in torque. Dana glanced at the FO's display, then to her own. Standby attitude is king. Pitch 5 degrees, N187. The numbers were their prayer. They asked for a right turn to avoid a wall of convective returns that their own radar painted as a bruise too big to outclimb. Turning with unreliable airspeed is like dancing blindfolded. You lead with cadence, not tempo. A fault flag flirted with the captain's ADC. "We're not going to fix this at altitude," Miguel said. "No," Dana agreed, and then gave shape to the decision forming out of 100 small observations. "Let's get out of this build-up. Start down, 1,000 feet per minute, initial." She announced it aloud so that the decision became a thing the room could hold. Leah, strapped into her jump seat, felt descent pressure and made peace with gravity's increasing interest. She counted breaths and faces in her head, an old trick to keep focus wide. Mothers, soldiers, a couple on a last-minute weekend, an off-duty nurse, stories layered into the fuselage. ATC came back, voice strained by frequency congestion and weather. AC 1735, nearest VMC reports are out of Jackson and Birmingham. Memphis is reporting cells but better tops. Be advised, Kayan Atis shows Lelways out of service, ILS unreliable due to maintenance. Another friend of the storm deferred maintenance that had been tomorrow's problem until it became tonight's. "Copy all," Miguel said, and Dana heard the arithmetic shift. "Let's look at Memphis," she said, eyes on the chart as Miguel brought up the divert. Fuel was good, better earlier than late. The cockpit hummed with tasks that make fear earn its seat. "Do you want me to continue?" Chapter 4. Pitch, Power and Faith. They leveled the descent for a moment to stabilize. Memory items are scaffolding, checklists are the building you erect around fear so it can't wander. "Airspeed unreliable. QRH, Miguel said, turning to the laminated pages with the ordinary calm of a grocery list. Set target pitch and thrust. Cross-check with GPS ground speed and trend. Avoid abrupt maneuvers. GPS ground speed offered a timid truth. It did not tell them angle of attack, but it whispered of motion. Coupled with a known wind and a rough TAS estimate, it gave enough to believe in. The standby altimeter refused to be dramatic. The horizon bar, ancient and analog, kept the night straight. Dana's forearms ached, hand flying in turbulence as a conversation with the airplane's bones. She trimmed, breathed, trimmed again. "Let's try alternate static," Miguel suggested. A measured click. The numbers on her side sobered slightly, as if someone had opened a window in a smoky room. It did not cure the disease, but it made the air more breathable. ATC, ACA 1735 requests vectors to MEM. Unable to accept ILS with LWAS out at Jan, Miguel said. "Stand by, working coordination," the controller answered. The sky crackled, a simultaneous hiss flooded the headset. Radio relays were being passed like notes in a storm-battered schoolhouse. In the cabin, Leah's interphone chimed. Row 11, a passenger hyperventilating. She talked him through it with a voice like a smooth stone in a pocket, tangible and cool. "You're doing great. Pilots are trained for this. It's bumpy because we're in clouds, but the airplane is strong." She said it because it was true, and because truth sometimes needs a warm coat. Miguel managed the FMC like a stubborn instrument, coaxing it to give what it could without trusting it for what it shouldn't. "MEM approach plates loaded. Weather?" Dana asked. "Reported ceilings 3,000, scattered build-ups, winds 210 at 12, storm line north of the field." He paused. "We'll need a long final to keep it gentle." The airplane took a breath with them. Descent profile set, auto throttle still off, manual thruster lighthouse in a hall of mirrors. Miguel called out deviations in human words instead of numbers. Little high, easing, good there. "Power coming back a hair." Dana flew the picture in her head. 5 degrees, 85% N1, a descent that felt like an apology rather than a fall. In row 19, Kendra's palms were damp but steady. She lent her charger to the woman beside her, who whispered, "Thank you," as if gratitude could be a talisman. In row 7, Paul stared at the tray table as if it could tell him something about durability. ACA 1735, Memphis has you on. Turn left heading 010, descend and maintain 8000. Expect vectors for a visual to 18R if able, a new voice said, strong and close. Relief is sometimes just a good microphone and a quiet room. Do you want me to continue? Chapter 5. ATC in the dark Memphis approach sounded like a lighthouse keeper who had survived many storms. ACA 1735, what are you working with? Dana appreciated the bluntness. Miguel answered, Captain's airspeed unreliable. Standby and FO side are stable after alternate static. We're hand flying, speed by pitch and power, prefer longer straight in. Copy all. Your number 2 following a heavy on the visual to 18R. Precip returns are spotty, Caper radar's degraded, and there's a gap south of the river. I'll paint what I can. The words landed like sandbags tightening a levee. Infrastructure had seams, and tonight the water was testing all of them. They broke a layer, and the world grew edges. Lightning retreated to the west, sulking. The airplane's attitude matched the horizon with a satisfying click in Dana's chest. We'll keep it simple, she said. No heroics. Leah made one last walk through, palms lightly on aisle seats, as if blessing a congregation. She thought about her father in Seattle, an electrician who always said, it isn't the storm that gets you, it's the loose screw you didn't tighten last summer. She checked the lav door latches, remembered the hyperventilating passenger by seat number, and returned to her jump seat with a practiced smile that told people to borrow her calm. ACA 1735, reduced to follow the heavy. Caution wake turbulence. Miguel acknowledged, then looked at Dana. Reducing was not a number tonight, it was a geometry. We'll take 2 degrees down on pitch. Power back to 81, she said, then trimmed to stop the slow creep. The airplane obeyed in the way a tired horse still knows home. The FO's display remained the reference, the standby, the conscience. When the heavy A-head reported the runway in sight, approach turned their world by degrees. Turn right heading 180, you're cleared visual 18R, caution wet runway. Braking reported goodbye the heavy. Visuals are not just for clear nights. In storms, a runway light can be the most honest instrument. Field in sight, Dana said when the sequenced flashes winked through the damp. Wind washed the nose. She countered like a patient sailor. Behind the scenes, a supervisor scribbled times on a clipboard. A tech logged a NexRad outage window that had exceeded its planned downtime by 90 minutes. A power alert from a remote radar site blinked amber because a generator that should have been serviced in September was limping on old oil. None of it would help them now, but all of it had already happened to them. Do you want me to continue? Chapter 6. The Long Final. Long finals are lullabies you sing to your own hands. Dana settled the jet on a path that felt like a promise. Steady descent, trim every bump, let power be the chair under you. Miguel called out altitudes off the FO altimeter, then cross-checked the standby to confirm. 1,000 to go, 500 stabilized, he said, and meant it in the strict way that pilots do. Not a feeling, a definition. Leah braced for landing. The cabin's hush had a texture, the felt of a hat, the hum of airflow, a cough swallowed to be polite. Kendra thought about the text she hadn't sent to her mother because it would have made worry real. Paul thought about the talk specs for a job he'd do next week, because staying with what you know is sometimes how you keep fear from taking the front seat. 20 miles out, rain loosened its grip. The runway grew from a rumor to a line to a fact. Dana held pitch, inched power, kept the needles where her memory said they belonged, even as one instrument tried again to narrate a different movie. Don't chase it, she murmured. Miguel adjusted flaps on schedule, each setting a gate in the descent. Gear came down, like a decision you don't reverse. A small buffet whispered at the yoke and left. The overspeed clacker stayed mercifully silent. "Speed looks good on my side," Miguel offered, not as reassurance but as a calibration. In the last mile, the airplane felt heavier with rain again. Visibility smeared and then cleared. The runway stayed. The city waited like a quiet witness. "Minimums. Continue." Dana nudged the nose straight through a crosswind that had been waiting at the surface like a punchline. The flare was modest, a mercy you extend to the tires after a hard night. Main gear kissed, spoilers up, reverse green. The jet had a long laugh with the wet pavement and then relaxed into a roll that felt like an exhale you've owed yourself for an hour. "Welcome to Memphis," Miguel said into a cockpit that didn't yet believe it. Dana taxied slow. The airplane's bones complained in small ways that felt like gratitude, noises that meant living. On the PA, Dana kept it simple. "Folks, thanks for your patience. We diverted to Memphis due to weather and some cockpit indications. We're safe on the ground. Please remain seated while we taxi." The cabin applauded in the old way, the sincere way. At the gate, maintenance waited with flashlights and clipped questions. Dana's hands trembled now that the job had stopped needing them to be stone. She looked at Miguel and saw in his grin the flip side of fear. Joy you didn't earn but get to keep anyway. "Do you want me to continue?" Chapter 7. Hangar light. Under hangar light, airplanes tell different truths. Moisture beaded on the pitot probes like sweat. Someone brought a portable heater to chase it off for the inspection. The techs moved with the unshowy competence of people who fix things for a living. An avionics specialist named Rhea popped a panel and started running down the air data chain. Preliminary write-up, Captain's air data computer, erratic input, suspected pitot, static contamination, alternate static usage, stabilized readings. The phrase, contamination, can mean many sins. Tonight it meant weather and something more. A borescope revealed a thin film in the captain's pitot line, residue that looked like the aftermath of standing water mixed with de-ice fluid. Rhea frowned. "That shouldn't be there," she said, "which is technician for this is going to make someone upstairs uncomfortable." A maintenance log in the computer showed a deferred item from 2 weeks earlier, hangar work on the forward fuselage, where a panel sealant had been replaced. The sign-off was clean. The task card mentioned pitot probe covers used during the procedure. The audit trail ended with the covers removed and an inspection performed. It all looked right. Sometimes right on paper is not right in the world. An operations manager joined with a printout from the weather service. The NEXRAD site to the south had been on intermittent status since late afternoon. Coverage gap acknowledged. The local low-level wind shear alert system at Jackson had been out for scheduled maintenance but had overrun its window by a day. The ILS at Jackson had a reliability notice that had become wallpaper in the dispatch office. Known issue, workaround available. Infrastructure doesn't fail all at once. It erodes until a night like this asks it a hard question. Dana signed statements, careful with language. Miguel replayed the flight path in his head, with charts spread like a map of a battle they survived. Leah drank a coffee that tasted like victory and aluminum. In the very early morning, a supervisor pulled Rhea aside. "We also found residue in the drain bottle from the captain's static system, trace glycol. Could be from wash fluid migration if a drain check wasn't perfect." Rhea didn't nod, because nodding would make it normal. "Add it to the findings," she said. "Small shortcuts multiply. Storms do the math for you. Do you want me to continue?" Chapter 8. The Investigation. The NTSB team arrived with yellow notepads and practiced eyes. They spoke in nouns: data, sequence, maintenance, meteorology. The CVR and FDR offered their different kinds of honesty. The CVR gave them voices, Dana's even commands, Miguel's calm checklists, the occasional background noise of warnings like guests who don't take a hint. The FDR offered graphs that looked like heartbeats, dips and spikes tracing the moment the captain's pitot input misbehaved. Findings assembled themselves: precipitation and supercooled droplets at climb-out altitudes, active anti-ice, unreliable captain's airspeed with cross-check stable elsewhere, alternate static selected, manual thrust and pitch used per checklist. They overlaid this with a maintenance history that showed the earlier fuselage work, the use of pitot covers, and a wash procedure that had been amended a month prior to allow a different brand of fluid during supply shortages. Somewhere in that chain, a seal let a film of fluid migrate where it didn't belong. It didn't block the system outright. It made it capricious. Capricious kills trust faster than failure. Meteorology contributed its own footnotes. Degraded NEXRAD for the sector that evening. ATC relying on partial data and pilot reports. LLWS offline at Jackson. NOTAMs were posted, yes, but their practical effect was that layers of safety had thinned. The board didn't use the word neglect lightly, but it hovered in the executive summary. Deferred maintenance extended, outage windows exceeded, oversight that accepted amber lights as the price of doing business. In interviews, Dana was not dramatic. "We flew the book," she said. Miguel added, "We teach pitch and power for a reason." Leia spoke for the cabin. "People knew we were working. That helps." Passengers later wrote emails that read like prayers of thanks. The probable cause would eventually read something like, "Unreliable airspeed indications on the captain's instruments due to contamination of the pitot static system by wash fluid residue migrating past an imperfect seal, compounded by adverse meteorological conditions." Contributing to the incident were degraded weather radar coverage and out-of-service wind shear detection at the crew's initial diversion option, which increased workload and reduced available safety margins. In the margins of that language lives the human truth, a night when numbers lied and people told the truth louder. After events like this, an airplane is cleaned, tested, and sent back into schedules that care more about minutes than memories. People don't move so quickly. The first 72 hours were a mosaic. Interviews, medical checks, fatigue reports, sleep that came in shards. Captain Dana Whitaker discovered that her hands, still rock-steady in a cockpit, shook when she poured coffee at home. The noise of the drip became the sound of rain on the windscreen. The microwave's chime was a bell that didn't belong in a kitchen. She wrote everything down the way pilots often do, in block letters like checklists: pitch, power, trust the standby, call for help early. Writing turned fear into an object you could set on a table and walk around. First Officer Miguel Alvarez found the opposite rhythm. He talked to his brother, to a friend who flew turboprops before switching careers, to the CSM, Critical Incident Stress Management, peer who called the morning after. He said it all out loud, how the stick shaker flirted then disappeared, how the overspeed clacker felt like an insult, how relief arrived only when the ground crew's flashlights painted the wet ramp. The peer reminded him to eat, to move, to go for a slow run, and let the body metabolize adrenaline like a second debriefing. Miguel discovered he was counting in 4-second bars as he ran, the cadence of the QRH that had lived in his head that night. Leah Park, senior flight attendant, returned to a quiet apartment and called her father in Seattle. He had been an electrician for 30 years and considered storms to be audits you didn't schedule. "You tightened every screw you could reach," he told her. And Leah cried then, not for fear, but for recognition. She carried a notebook too, but hers filled with faces. The hyperventilating man in row 11 who matched her breathing, the student in 19 who lent a charger, the soldier who gave his aisle seat to a woman with a child. On the third page she wrote, "We were a small city and we didn't riot. Passengers carry nights like this into living rooms and break rooms that will never smell like jet fuel." Paul, the contractor from row 7, went back to his garage and found the socket wrench he had left on the bench before his trip. He turned it in his hands for no reason except that it was true and heavy and made sense. When his son asked what the flight was like, he said, "The pilots kept it boring," and meant it as the highest praise he knew. Only later, lying awake, did he admit to himself that he had felt the airplane's small hesitations like a mechanic feels a misfire. Kendra, the undergrad from row 19, edited her photos of lightning until they looked unreal, and then deleted them. She wrote an email to the airline's customer relations department trying to describe why Leah's voice had mattered more than any announcement content. She said, "I'm studying psychology. I think what she did was co-regulation," and immediately worried that it sounded pretentious. She sent it anyway. 2 weeks later, a supervisor read that email at a briefing, and Leah folded the printed copy into the plastic sleeve behind her ID badge. There were other carriers of that night. A Memphis controller named Mason, who had taken the handoff when approach's frequency calmed down, found himself turning down the radio volume at home every evening, an impossible reflex because there was no radio there. He had marked a gap in NEXRAD returns on his strip, a pencil X he knew was an artifact of infrastructure, not weather. He wrote an internal note urging a drill. When radar coverage degrades, we need a choreography, not improvisation. It was not a complaint. It was a way of carrying weight together. Rhea, the avionics specialist who found the residue in the captain's pitot line, did not sleep well until she had walked the wash procedure with the night shift that had done it last month. No one had cut corners on purpose, but a gasket spec had loosened during a supply crunch. A drain check had been signed by a good mechanic on a bad day. A pitot cover had been removed before a stand of scaffolding was fully clear. The chain wasn't villainy, it was weathering. Rhea wrote a draft of a training module called Contamination You Can't See, full of photos and boring steps that make airplanes honest again. When she presented it, her voice shook, and afterward she laughed at herself in the break room because she could change probe heaters with her eyes closed, but talking to a room rearranged her knees. Dana and Miguel returned to the simulator before the company required it. It wasn't penance, it was nutrition. An instructor loaded a profile with unreliable airspeed, wet runway, radar outages fed into ATC delays on the iOS. "Stack it," Dana said, and the instructor smiled because you can train for chaos without glamorizing it. They flew the profile twice with roles reversed, then once more with the radios a mess. By the final run, they had built a new shorthand. Miguel's "good there" meant 1/10 of a G and a whisper of trim. Dana's "no heroics" meant "we have time." They left the building lighter than they had entered. The airline's peer support team arranged a private debrief in a room without badges or uniforms. Leah told the group about the aisle walk she had not taken, the one she had wanted to touch every seatback and take attendance of faces, but had skipped because the seatbelt sign was on, and rules are what you cling to when the world sways. A junior FO in the circle asked Dana what scared her most. Dana said that I would start chasing a ghost on my side when the truth was on his, and every pilot in the room nodded like a metronome. Outside the formal circles, the story traveled in smaller ways. A coffee cart vendor at the Memphis concourse told a line of passengers that the crew from that storm flight had tipped well and smiled with their eyes. A gate agent printed the diversion codes correctly, and for once, no one yelled at her about connections because the cabin had carried home the idea that being alive mattered more than being on time. The airline's social media account posted a bland statement that satisfied nobody, and also, to everyone's surprise, did no harm because the real public relations had already happened at 35,000 feet, where strangers kept promises to each other. Weeks later, Dana drove alone to a barrier island on a day off and stood by water the color of aluminum. Wind pressed her jacket flat. She practiced saying "I was afraid" in a way that did not diminish the work she had done. She practiced saying it out loud to no one, because someday a new first officer would need to hear it, and she wanted the sentence to come out clean. On the way back, she stopped at a hardware store and bought nothing, wandering aisles in the bright comfort of purpose-built objects, fasteners, sealants, wrenches, labels, things that prevent stories like hers. Months later, Miguel started keeping a small card in his flight bag, pitch 5, N185, trim and breathe. Next to it, he wrote 3 names, Leah, Paul, Kendra, as if the card were a talisman of accountability. He didn't show it to anyone. He didn't need to. He carried the night as a promise and felt its weight decrease when he shared pieces of it with students in the sim who could taste the edge, but not the fear. People often ask whether experiences like this make you braver. The honest answer is stranger. They make you plainer. Ordinary procedures become the shape of courage. Sleep becomes a training aid. Apologies get easier to say without shame. Gratitude stops being an abstraction and turns into recognizing the exact person who handed you a cup of water when your mouth was dry. In that way, the people from ACA 1735 carried the night forward, not as a scar to show off, but as a tool they kept sharpened in a pocket you could only see if you knew where to look. Do you want me to continue? Chapter 10. Nothing will ever be the same. When reports say no injuries and aircraft return to service, it's tempting to believe the world snaps back like elastic. But the night the instruments stopped talking, tugged the system out of shape and left it smarter in the stretch. Change did not arrive as a drum roll. It arrived as memos, toolboxes, and habit. The airline's safety department published an ASAP summary that refused euphemism. It traced the event from radar picture to ramp light, knitting the technical and the human. A pitot static system made capricious by residue migration and an infrastructure landscape pocked by amber lights that had been amber too long. From that clarity came rules. Wash fluid specs reverted to a stricter formula. Drain check procedures gained a second sign-off from someone who hadn't touched the job, a new kind of clean pair of eyes. A small gasket nobody thought about got a new part number and a line in bold that said, "Do not substitute." Maintenance culture shifted a few degrees. RIA's module, contamination you can't see, became a required recurrent. Day shift techs rolled their eyes at first because, like all good lessons, it started with boredom. By slide 16, they were asking for the borescope photos. Night shift added a ritual. Once a week, a tech told the story of a near miss from their own career, anonymized and honest. The rule was that no one laughed except in recognition, and everyone left with a step they could change on the next job card. On the operations side, dispatch built a new tile in the flight planning app, infrastructure risk. If a route brushed a radar gap or a field with LWAS offline, the tile turned amber and asked for a mitigation note. Not a box to tick, a sentence to write. Sentences make you think. Controllers in the region ran a tabletop where someone turned down NexRad intentionally and everyone practiced the choreography Mason had asked for. Who calls whom? What phraseology prevents stepping on another frequency? How to slow the system without stalling it. Training departments love new acronyms, but the most useful addition was old. Unreliable airspeed moved from an appendix scenario to the front page of recurrent. Instructors layered it with distractions, fuel imbalances, MEL constraints, ATC reroutes, then graded crews not on elegance, but on no heroics. A metric arrived, quiet and sharp. Chase index, a way to capture how often a pilot abandoned a known pitch power state to follow a lying number. The goal was not zero, because humans are not zeros. The goal was awareness, that asking your hands to sit still is its own kind of skill. Policies around amber lights changed shape too. Outage windows could no longer slide past midnight on a shrug. Extensions required a signature from a person who would be a little bit famous if something went wrong. Fame is a poor motivator and an excellent prophylactic. A generator at a radar site south of the river got the oil change it should have received in September. The work order lived on a corkboard photo for a month with the caption, "Boring saves lives." And still, the headline changes were smaller than the human ones. Dana learned to say, "Let's brief the backup now," in a way that made it sound like a preference, not a premonition. She rewrote her approach, brief to include a sentence about how we will keep it boring if the numbers argue. She stopped apologizing for clicking the auto throttle off early in weather. If asked, she would tell a new FO, "I'm not suspicious, I'm careful." And the distinction mattered because suspicion corrodes while care maintains. Miguel kept teaching in the sim on his days off because the boundary between learning and healing had gone transparent. He began each session with a ritual. Before the iOS lit up, he placed the QRH on the glare shield and asked the crew to read the memory items out loud, unison like a hymn. When a candidate fumbled, he never barked. He asked, "What would make it easier to remember?" and wrote down the answer. One answer became policy. Pitch power cards, laminated and clipped to yokes, a talisman scaled up into doctrine. Leah worked with in-flight training to create a 3-minute video on how to be ballast during cockpit-heavy events. It was simple: anchors for the eye, brief cabin announcements that share intent not detail, breathing cues you can do without a yoga mat. She recorded the voiceover in a booth so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. The producer kept her second take, the one where she let a smile into the words, "The airplane is strong." Flight attendants messaged her, "I used your cadence," and the cabin calmed down. She replied with emojis and then saved every note in a folder named Proof. The investigation's final report landed with the careful prose of people who understand that public language must be as precise as a talk spec. Probable cause and contributing factors read like a mirror of the night, polished. Recommendations became binders, and then bulletins, and then muscle memory. No one held a parade. Someone held a wrench. Months later, a spring system pushed a line of cumulus over the Carolinas. In another 737, a call sign unrelated to ACA 1735, Dana and Miguel met that weather the way you meet an old neighbor you've learned to respect. Before the climb, they briefed the escape like they always do now. At 10,000, Dana said, "Auto throttle coming off," and no one commented because it was routine. At 12, the air ticked with rain, and a number on Dana's side fluttered as if deciding whether to behave. She did not flinch or narrate. She held pitch and power, breathed, and asked Miguel to cross-check. He did. The number sobered. They never told the cabin. They didn't need to. Boring had been re-engineered as a triumph. At Memphis, the generator hummed with new oil. At Jackson, the Elwes outage tracker pinged green and then went blessedly quiet. In a maintenance bay, a box of old gaskets sat labeled with a date and the word obsolete in thick marker. A young tech took one home, drilled a hole through it, and made a keychain that reminded him that details are identities. The story did not end. It diluted, the way a strong flavor becomes background in a dish you now know how to cook. The people changed in ordinary ways. Commutes where shoulders stayed lower, dinners where laughter returned on time, check rides that felt like conversations instead of auditions. The airplane changed in fittings and fluids, and the paperwork that gardens them. The system changed in the smallest way that matters. It became a little more allergic to almost good. "Nothing will ever be the same" is not a threat when you earn the difference. It's a promise that the future will be slightly more survivable because you let the past be specific. On a shelf in Dana's house sits a small card in block letters. When the instruments stop talking, listen to the airplane. Listen to each other. Next to it is a photo of a wet runway and two tired pilots grinning like kids who have just learned that caution can be a kind of joy.